In the north, they thought they knew all there was to know of war. Until the War of the Rift. While the Southern King hid, warm in his keep, the Darkwings cut their bloody trail from frozen north to winter's edge. Alone, the Warden and his small garrison turned their whiskers to the icy wind. At the end of hope, in a last barrage, they wiped Batkind from the land and memory. With no sign of the Darkwings' return, in time, few believed them little more than a fairy's tale. But at Mount Cauldron, time had been all they needed. An old enemy claws free of their icy tomb and hungers for vengeance. But not all is lost. King Rattus brings north a cause for hope. A bastard prince, placed in the paws of the Warden of the Wastes to raise as his own. A secret of blood never to be told. Now, fate calls for a hero in a murderous screech, and one young rat will answer. The stomp of his father's boots on the stair was how every morning began for Arlo. The booming shout to ready himself was louder still. But such was Lord Eivor's zeal at a new day. Dawn was breaking over winter's edge, and Arlo was yet to miss one. The castle echoed with the horns of the returning hunters, bringing their night's bounty. Arlo's little heart quickened to hear it. The only thrill to be found inside the high walls was a hunter's tales of what lay beyond them. Arlo tells himself it's a good life here in Winter's Edge. The bustling of contented rat folk, the crisp mountain air, and without the endless scourge of frogs the southerners suffer. Why should he want for more? There was no time for tales of the hunt today. Lord Eivor was already dividing what was an excellent haul, happy to see his people provided for. Arlo longed only to join the hunt, to see the ratdom or even the lands beyond. His father called it a fool's wish. Arlo's destiny was unshakable, much like the keep that would become his by birthright. Tiki's shop was perhaps Arlo's favorite, as the shopkeeper had wares from far and wide. But getting him to part with his curiosities was never easy. Arlo has no memory of his mother, But Hilda's food was a true taste of maternal kindness. With the right ingredients, she would make meals nourishing to body and soul. Chief Mason Leaf was the rat Arlo most admired. As younger brother to Lord Eivor, his carefree uncle never faced the burden of being warden of the wastes. With walls this strong, his duties were light, leaving him plenty of time for his nephew. Crunk was a rat's rat, with no interests beyond his forge. If you have the parts, this master crafts rat can make armor and weapons that would see off a sky scorcher bite, or so he claims. Arlo wondered how well they'd do against something that wasn't a myth. The hunters had brought unwelcome news. A family of the reviled creatures ratfolk called backstabbers had moved into the wastes. Eivor told his son to fetch his weapons. His father had no explanation for suddenly taking Arlo on a hunt. It even gave the hunters pause. Arlo had been taught to fight, and better than most. But rarely had he been tested. He was determined to prove himself. The rugged terrain of the outskirts could have taken all day to traverse, but Arlo's trusty grappling hook allowed him to swing between its many crevices. Arlo liked the feel of a sharp axe cutting through the vines. The wilds were part of his home, and nothing in them would frighten him. The famous frostberry bushes of the wastes were in full fruit already. Their juice made a healthy tonic, though Lord Eivor preferred them fermented. His father was a sturdy rat, built for strength, not speed. So Arlo found it curious that he challenge him to a race. The prospect of the hunt had filled Lord Eivor with a vigor that his son had not seen in years, or at least since breakfast. A warden fights the hardest battles, he told Arlo, and needs the sharpest blade. With that, Eivor gifted Arlo his own sharpening whetstone. Whether these beasts were named for their spines or for some past unforgivable deed, no Rad knew. Either way, Arlo was about to find himself at the pointy ends of this brood. Even young backstabber Red attacks were brutal, but a well-timed dodge would see Arlo escape unscathed. This backstabber lived up to its name with its deadly white attack, but Arlo's shield could block the deadly spikes. This young one used vicious yellow attacks. Arlo had to time his parries perfectly. This mother had left her young to fight alone, but the same could not be said of Lord Eivor as he leapt to his son's side. It was Lord Eivor's mighty blade that took her head, but the fight was won together. Arlo basked in his father's pride, almost as warm as at the fire inside Winter's Edge. Triumphant and keen to tell the tale of his son's victories, Lord Eivor set to a night of drinking with the elders. Arlo was reluctant to return to his bed, wondering how long he must wait to hunt again. The booming footsteps that woke him this time were nothing like those of his father. He had found his father. The warden stood alone, holding back a whole Dark Wing army, their cruel Count Kazak leading them. His father charged, but the Dark Wing Count was as fast as he was strong. The Winter's crown tumbled to Arlo's feet, now without a head to rest on. There was no time to grieve his father, as from above the Count revealed his greatest weapon, a sky scorcher. Not a fairy's tale, but an undead beast whose very breath could level kingdoms. And its eye was trained on Arlo. All that came next was a fog of bloodlust, snapping jaws, and the beating of leathery wings. But there could be no victory. Arlo awoke, groggy and warm to his father's shouts. Only he wasn't in bed. The warmth was from the fire that had engulfed Winter's Edge, and the shouts were his uncle's. The only other survivor of the Darkwing attack, Leaf was bruised and his hind paws barely steady. He'd seen villagers flee to the outskirts. Arlo knew it was up to him to make them safe. He'd know these anywhere. Krunk's smithy hammer and Hilda's chef's knife. Arlo wondered why they would leave them here. With the attack at Winter's Edge, no hunters had come to check their traps. Arlo thought he might find a use for them. reason his friends had fled. The taunting shrieks revealed that this was Baron Frostovic, son of the Darkwing who took his father, and therefore a perfect target for his revenge. He'd know these anywhere. Krunk's smithy hammer and Hilda's chef's knife. Arlo wondered why they would leave them here. With the attack at Winter's Edge, no hunters had come to check their traps. Arlo thought he might find a use for them. foe was beaten, but seeing what had been inflicted on Hilda and Krunk, Arlo's need for vengeance was only growing. Arlo suddenly wished to be within the walls of Winter's Edge, to hear the boot and boom of his father at dawn, a sound he realized he'd never hear again. He needed to return to whatever was left and make his plan. Spent from his journey, Arlo fell into his father's chair, the one thing still standing in the ashy ruin. It was his chair now, along with the title of Warden of the Wastes. Arlo's shoulders slumped at the weight of it, but only for a moment. The Dark Wings had nearly scorched the ratdom to ash before, and now it was for him to stop them. He was going to rebuild Winter's Edge, a beacon of hope from which to drive back the shadow. Rebuilt walls would not keep Winter's Edge safe alone. They needed weapons and armor, but had no smith. Leaf knew of a master crafter living in the rift, if Arlo was of an open mind. The smoke had attracted help in the unlikely form of a pirate. Captain Blacktail had seen many towns razed in his years, usually by his own paw, a fact he chose not to mention as he offered his services. The ship King Rattus's Revenge would take the young warden wherever he had need to go. Arlo had heard the tales of battles that scarred the rift at his father's knee. He wondered how much of the stories could be true. The ancestral home to the pond scum, the rift had seen endless war between rats, bats, and frogs. Even the river refused to pass through it now. Its muddy bed was grave to beasts and boats alike. Arlo's foot slipped on something that was not another bone. Bottles were littering the muddy path now. Whoever left them could not be far. More bottles lay outside the forge, which was otherwise as quiet as every other dead thing that haunted this place. The pile of bottles was large, even for one who drinks like a merman, and it seemed to be breathing. Arlo was amazed the merman could swing his hammer, let alone see who he was hitting. A couple of thumps on the head soon brought him to his senses. Following him inside, Arlo realized this must be the smith. But his furnace was as cold and broken as the merman's spirit. The smith hunted bottles as he told Arlo of his woes. The frogs had attacked the village, kidnapping his wife and apprentice daughters. He would not light his forge until they were home. This was a problem Arlo swore he could solve. The smith took some strength from this. He introduced himself as Ron and flashed a grin, telling Arlo the frogs didn't take everything. While hardly a full armory, Ron had what was needed. This two-handed skull crusher was a gift made by his daughters. He put it in Arlo's paws in hope it would help save them. Together, the pair ventured on, heading towards the frog camp situated in the ruined temples. At the top of the pile of corpses was one that was not Frog. The smith let out a desperate cry at the sight of his wife, lifeless atop the pile. He cried out again, but this time it was a call for blood. The old rat that stood before Arlo was barely able to raise his head, and his one cloudy eye felt as though it was looking through the warden. As Arlo reached out his paw, the hooded rat slammed his spear into the ground, imparting his gift onto the young warden. Arlo was glad to have met the old rat. Although he looked old and feeble, Arlo was sure that he was more than capable of looking after himself. Before Arlo could act, Ron was in the clutches of the enemy. Something else came his way. Tumbling down the temple stair, Arlo was met with another horror. The head of the smith. It was Arlo now who took up the battle cry. Arlo tried not to think of how many friends, old and new, lay dead. He still had more to do. Rita and Ruby were free, but without their father, there was little for them here. Arlo offered them a new home at Winter's Edge and a forge to continue in their father's footsteps. The mermaids were grateful and said they would find their way to the keep once they had laid Ron to rest. A stranger was meditating in the stillness. Arlo gasped. It was a frog. Before he could lift his blade, the frog croaked that he was an outcast, named Short Tongue. He'd come to rebuild the ancestral home of Bogmire Forge, a place for frogs who sought peace. No sooner had they agreed a truce than the two warriors had to fight. Side by side, the pair fought well, and the attacker soon disappeared again, back into thin air. Persuaded of the frog's honesty, Arlo left Short Tongue to his quest for peace. In return, the frog swore Arlo would always find a warm welcome there. This much Arlo knew. No rat would rebuild Winter's Edge on an empty stomach. The kitchen had to be fixed and stocked. Leaf suggested Arlo visit the Night Eyes of the Golden Forest, known for their hearty food. Arlo hoped rat wasn't the key ingredient.